Hello and welcome to Virtual Coffee Lunch and Learn Edition. Virtual Coffee's mission is to be a welcoming tech community that allows room for growth and mentorship at all levels, and to create meaningful opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. To find our code of conduct, events, or to learn more, you can check out our site, virtualcoffee.io. We're really glad to have all of you here with us today, and I especially want to thank Dan, our presenter, for being here. Dan's going to be talking about Next.js's app router. This is a continuation of the first part of an intro to the app router. And with that, Dan, I'll let you go ahead and go from here.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Thanks everybody for coming. Yeah, so this wasn't planned to be a two-parter. It was meant to be just a single thing, but well, I hit like, I don't know, an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes, and Kirk was like, hey, maybe we should think about stopping. And I was like halfway through. So, it works out to just do part two. I just published last night. I caught up on Lunch and Learn publishing. So I published part one on YouTube, as well as a couple of Mark Noonan's talks that he's done in the last couple of weeks. And so if you're in Virtual Coffee and looking at Slack, you can check out the announcements, or you can go to our YouTube page, which I forget what the link is, but you can find the link on virtualcoffee.io. And I will paste the link here to the in the Zoom chat to the video for part one. And yeah, so let me start sharing my screen, and I will kind of get going. All right, so all of this, so I'm serving all of this from, there's no slides, but I have all this on a repo that's up on YouTube. And so I'll paste link to this in chat too, if I can find the chat again. Now I'm sharing, yeah, there it is. Okay, cool. And so you can follow along there. And so what I did here was, well, first of all, this README contains links for the videos. I will put the second part up once it's up. I think any links that I end up going over today are already linked here. So there's some resources and stuff to check out. And then in this repo, I actually broke this out into pull requests per section of the talk. And so last time we did our intro, we talked about routes and layouts for the app router, and how they look, how they're a little bit different than the Pages router. We talked about some more route, fun things, and then we talked about error handling. And so you can look at these pull requests, and they're linked in the README as well. But the pull requests they're based off of like the basic install, right? And so you can see what things changed, and then each pull request has some stuff that we're talking about. So if you'd like to go back later and review what we did, I've updated a bunch of this. I haven't updated the code, but I updated the docs and things like that since last time. And so it should be pretty easy to follow. But if you go to the main, if you go to the main README, that's all linked in here as well. So this is linked to the pull request. This is also being hosted on Vercel. So you can, anything that I show, most of my stuff, I'm going to show the local dev version, but you can see it also running Vercel, and each pull request has its own sort of, I forget what they call it on Vercel, but deploy preview basically for just that branch, if you're interested in checking that out. So yeah, so we ended right before we got to data fetching, which is kind of one of the more fun things about the app router, and one of the things that I like the most about the new setup. And so I'm excited to kind of get back into it and show you all what we got going on. So yeah, if you want to follow along, you can check out that the data fetching pull request here. That's what we're going to be looking in, and I have my branches on data fetching as well. So this is the code, and I think we'll just kind of dig in. So in the Pages router, in the Pages router, to do data fetching, what you had to do was use some hooks called, well, there was like get server side props or get static props, the functions that you put in Pages, and each page would, so here's data fetching, right? So these are the ones that you could use in the old Next.js router. Get static props, get static paths, which is a way to pre-generate dynamic things, get server-side props, and there was a get initial props, but I think they've moved away from that as well. And so most of what you would use in the pages router back in the day was get server-side props or get static props, right? And so what get static props does is you can make any kind of fetch. So you can see here, they're making a fetch call, right? And read the data. You don't have to use fetch. I mean, this could be talking to your database. This could be loading a JSON file. This could be like a lot of different things. And then returning it as props to the page. Right? If you did get static props, this would happen at build time, right? Meaning it would never change until you did a new build. They have some stuff to try to get around that, but that's the basic thing. And then get server-side props is the same sort of situation, except this runs on the server when you load the page, and then it also just passes props through to the page. And so anything that you return from here has to be serializable, which means basically it needs to work if you do a JSON what is it, toString. So you can't return anything that is a function or a complicated JavaScript object that's not just an array or an object, because the tunnel between get server-side props and page is just the props, and that thing gets passed through as plain text, and then the page parses the JSON and returns it. So there's there's a decent amount of limitations to the setup, and of course, like some of those limitations are more related to the different routing paradigms. You know, there's no layouts in the pages router, and so if you had say you had a section, well, I don't want to show you this exact thing, but say you had a section that was like, I don't know, your user profile or whatever, and then you had a bunch of pages inside there to edit different parts, you'd have to, you know, make this fetch request again every time, or do some sort of fancy thing where you're trying to pass props, but there's no way to really like raise that stuff up and then pass it around.
A quick question, Dan. Do you mind just zooming in the screen, maybe just once? Yeah, that's good. I think.
Is that good?
Yeah. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and so this is the Next.js docs, and so this is like still, all this stuff still works on and just to clarify, on Next 13, which is the first version where the app router is available. All of these, the pages router still works just fine, right? And I talked about migrating a little bit in the first part. If we have time, we can talk about it again. But one of the nice things, the way that it did this was you can upgrade to Next 13 without having to redo everything. You know, if you have an existing Next.js app that uses the pages router, you can upgrade to Next 13 and it'll still work just the way it did before. And then you can start to incrementally migrate to the app router. So you can have both running at the same time, which is pretty cool. So anyway, the way that we do data fetching in the app router is a lot different. And all of that is because of the fact that Next.js app router uses server components to render content, right? And we talked a lot about server components in the first part, so I'm not going to dig into that too much. If you want to catch up on it, they have, Next.js has this is called React Essentials, but this is really just about server components. They have a lot of explanation about what server components are and how they work in Next.js, and it's a pretty good read. And in my repo, there are in the sort of README, the main README, there's more server components resources. So this React server components on patterns.dev is a really good article about it. And then you got Dan Abramov kind of doing his thing, which is like, it's just like a comment on a Hacker News thread, but it's very insightful. And then there's links from there to other things too. So if you would like to dig into server components more, you can watch part 1 or check out some of these resources. And so in our React component, or I mean, in our example app, I started making a Star Wars section, right? And so because they have the Star Wars API, which, you know, is funny. Mark Noonan used the Star Wars API in one of his last recent talks too, which is funny because it's nice. It's nice because you just know it's there, and also I like Star Wars, and so it's always kind of fun. But this is the way that we do data fetching on a normal route in the app router. So what you can do in any, so the app routers on a route, the default export is the page. You don't have to call it page. You can call it, Star Wars page or whatever. But the basic principle is as a default export. This page, this whole file is a server component. And so anything that happens in this file only runs on the server, which lets you do things like this, right? And so this is just calling a function. It's calling an async function. It's doing a wait, and the async function is right here. And all this so I have this like sleep utility, which is really only for example purposes so that we can see the loading screens and things like that. That's all that does. That does is just like makes this request take a second longer. And then other than that, this is like very straightforward fetch call, right? So we're getting the fetch, we're returning the JSON, and that's what this function does. And this function would work anywhere in JavaScript that has fetch, right? So you could do this on the front end easily. But the value of doing it on the back end is, there's lots of values, some of which I'll get into. One of the easy ones is if this was an API that required authentication, like header keys and things like that, you wouldn't want to expose that on the client side, right? Because anything that happens on the client side, people can see, they can get those keys and they can do whatever they want. So this makes it so none of this stuff ever appears in the client. And so if you're used to Erect, and so this is the app running on my machine. But if you're used to doing sort of traditional React things, right, you would load some sort of probably what I used to do was load React Query, which is a library that I like a lot, that does client-side stuff, and it makes these fetches, pretty easy, and it has loading states and like error states and returns things, and you can do all sorts of stuff, right? And you don't have to do much of any of that anymore, which is like incredibly freeing, right? So the other, we talked about this a bit before, but the other thing about the server-side components is anything that I import here also never gets passed to the client, right? And so this page loads this list of people, and returns this stuff, but there's none of the JavaScript, if I was using some API client, right? For instance, like I'm sure there's probably somebody made one, a Star Wars API client or some other API client, you don't need to, none of that gets loaded, right? We use Airtable and Virtual Coffee for a lot of things. And Airtable has a JavaScript client, but to load it on the browser, you have to download all that stuff. So the user has to download all that stuff. And this isn't only for API requests, right? But that's the most common thing you're going to be doing. If you had a database connection on your server, you could do that instead of doing a fetch at all, right? You could connect just like we used to. In a PHP app, if I was doing this thing would be, connect to MySQL and select people from Star Wars, that kind of thing. So it can be anything, right? And you never have to worry about getting to the client. You never have to worry about exposing any secrets. What gets returned here, people see, but anything that happens around that, people don't, and it's really nice. And so here is our Star Wars people page. Let's see if so I'll show you loading in a second, but all it does is grabs the list and grabs a list of people, and it's just the first page, I suppose, and then exports, a list, right? And so what this gets us in Next.js is if you view the source for this situation, it is the source for this before it's loaded is going to be a lot of this connection, right? And a lot of the outside stuff. And it probably won't, I'm not sure about that. Let me see. Oh, this is the dev server too. So sometimes lots of things are different, but so you can see, yeah, all right, so cool. So I'm viewing the source, it's probably pretty small and I know it's all chunked up, but if I view the source on this page, Luke Skywalker, people this HTML is here, which is really, really awesome. What the Next.js does is gets us this loading states too. So when we refresh this page, you can see this loading, right? And so what's happening here is all I'm doing to get that, right? And in traditional apps, you have to load up that, query library, like I was talking about, React Query or whatever it is, and then check the like loading state, and if the loading state, in your React component, you say, okay, if loading, then return some sort of loader, and if success, then do this, and in Next.js, all we have to do that is add a loading file, right? And so this is one of their special files that they have, and all their special files are they're referenced throughout all their docs, and then they have just a list of file conventions, right? So this is the list of file conventions, and so anything in the app router that is one of these files, they have special meaning, and then anything else anything else gets ignored. But the loading.js file is a server component that returns anything, right? So I have it just like this silly little animation that spins. It says loading, right? So that's all it is. You could do, this could be a lot, excuse me, this could be a lot closer to what we're going to see, right? So I could change this, and maybe that's not a bad idea, right? So what if we did this? What if we did instead of that spinning loading thing, right? We say loading, right? We can change that to something like that. No, beautiful. And now when we load this is like closer to what you see sometime. Sorry, there you go. So this is actually probably a better user experience because it looks like the thing that's going to get loaded in, right? And it's really easy to do, and you don't have to try tracking down any state or have a context thing that's hanging out around the entire library. There's lots of it's very powerful and very simple.
There's a question in the chat, Dan. Kirk asks, excuse me. Kirk asks, how does Next.js detect that you're in a loading state?
Yeah, so yes, his follow-up comment is the answer. So it detects that it's in a loading state because this is an async function, and so it waits till this async function resolves. And what React does, in React's docs explain this pretty well, but what it's doing behind the scenes is wrapping anything where there's a loading file, right? And so this loading file is in the Star Wars directory, right? So anything that's under here is going to use this loading file when things are loading. And so it wraps everything under this route in a React suspense whatever component, I guess you call it, and uses the loading component as the fallback parameter. And I'm going to get into suspense because you can use suspense in a Next.js app as well, but that's what it does. And so it's the same way that it handles errors, which we talked about a little bit in part one. Anytime there's an error file, so let's see here, danger zone error. Anytime there's an error file in a route folder, it will wrap that whole route folder in a error boundary in React. And show this content when there's an error. So that's what's here. So this is the same as something like suspense fallback equals loading component, right? So and that's how it does it, but it does it for you, so you don't have to like pipe all those things together, which is really nice, I think. Let's see, where do we want to go next? All right, so this is our loader, so it loads up the people, and we have in here a dynamic route, right? So this is the ID value, and so this thing is just making a link that says Star Wars people. Well, I had to do some stuff to get the ID out, but it's basically linking to the next ID, right? And so if you hover over this, you probably can't see that, but it says people/1, people/2. And so if you click on that, here's like an updated loading state. So you can have loading states that are in, that are nested inside, right? And so if this doesn't like make a ton of sense for that, I should have added a layout in here, but if you had, let's say like, let's pretend that this list was, or this thing had the whole list and then loaded a person when you clicked on it below, right? This loading, and well, it's not showing up. This loading animation yeah, you only saw it for a second, would appear below in the place where it is. And so you can use nested routes, nested layouts to a great effect, because the loading state can be just inside the thing. And everything outside of it doesn't re-render and doesn't change. And so that is the same with the error component as well. So if you had an error just in a component, and I think we looked at this in part 1, but if you had an error in a component, that error state would only show in wherever the layout was expecting it to show. And so, yeah, so let's look at so this is a page for a specific Star Wars person. And is this big enough, or should I pump this up one more? Sometimes I run out of room, but I'm fine pumping it up.
It seems okay, but maybe for the recording, yeah, maybe bump it just once. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, and so we have a pretty similar setup here, and I'll look at this function in a second, but this one gets our params from our params route. So any route that has a dynamic segment that gets passed in this params object. And then here, again, we're just sitting get person, which is a function that just grabs the string and makes a call to the Star Wars API as well. So yeah, so there's two new things in this section, and so we're displaying the stuff and kind of similar setup. One is the not found function, all right, and so what this does is basically it throws, right, but it throws a specific not found. This is not found from Next. This isn't something I wrote, but it throws a specific type of error that in Next.js you can catch with a 404 or with a not found page. And so in not found pages, just like errors and loading, you can nest, you can put them in your like nested layout segments. And so if we did people / whatever, this should Star Wars not found, right? Yeah, so like this, you can see it's still in our Star Wars layout. This isn't like a huge global 404 page, and it's not destroying anybody's time. It's just inside this little, this is the part that is the 404 page, the not found page. And that's what this looks like, Star Wars not found, right? And so you can see this doesn't have HTML, this doesn't have that Star Wars header, it is just that section, right? So it's anything that's inside the layout. And that's pretty handy. There are some, like right now, there's some limitation to this where this only happens if you throw if you return this not found function or call it. If you try to go to a page that like you don't have a dynamic route, but it doesn't exist, for right now, it only goes up to the global not found page, which is fine. But anyway, that's the not found. And then the generate metadata is, so this is a way to get your data, your metadata in front of the user quickly. And so that this is outside of the suspense situation. And ideally this is like faster, but this lets you set the title and things like that in a dynamic way. So that when you're looking at your page title, and I guess I didn't set the title in the loading, but you can set you can set the title of what it really should be, but in a dynamic thing, but while using your fetch data. So again, we're calling get person and the params.id, and then the metadata stuff is we dug into like all the things you can do, but you can set any of this, any of the metadata properties based on your fetch call. All right, cool. And so another thing, so I'm going to touch on this in a couple sections, but you might notice here that we're calling get person twice, right? We're calling it here and we're calling it here. And so without the optimizations that I'm about to talk about, that would make 2 separate fetch calls, right? And that's not what you want, right? You don't want to wait for a thing, especially if it's like something that's slow. But what Next.js does is it has sort of written on top of fetch. So you don't have to import anything special, but it just knows that it's going to take this over, and it caches identical fetch calls by default And so it also does, you can read about this in the docs, they call it dedupes, so deduplication. And so the code is like, the Next.js like framework is analyzing this page, noting that it's calling this fetch call twice and then only making it once. So there's both caching and there's like deduplication that helps. So yeah, I was talking about caching, but that's actually not relevant in this situation. So sorry about that. We'll get there later. But the deduplication means that this call, whether it's cached or not, is only going to happen once on this page. And that's true all the way through all the way through your like nested layouts. So if we were, I mean, this is only one level deep, but if like every single one of these layouts was calling this same API call, like the exact same one, it would only call, Next.js would only make that call once, which is really cool. And it's just like the kind of thing that makes writing this stuff a lot easier because you don't have to think about that, right? You don't have to try to cache on your own or try to pass through. Like what I would do previously was, if I needed something like this in multiple places, is try to make the call and wrap it in a context and pass or pass through in props or things like that, right? And you just don't need to worry about that if you're using the app router and fetch. It's not going to do that for you if you're not using fetch. And so if you're using Axios, for instance, on Node, I think by default it's not using fetch. It uses something else. That might be wrong, or that might have changed, but I'm pretty sure that's right. And so that's like something to watch out for. There's like multiple ways to make API requests in Node, and if you're using something other than the fetch, you don't get like the deduplication stuff that Next.js does for you, but you still can use it. Take care of that stuff.
The other thing I was going to say about the fetch is it's probably in your best interest to use fetch because for context, I work on the frameworks team at Netlify, and so like Dan's showing this locally right now, and he probably has it deployed. It's deployed serverless on for Cell right now, but you can also deploy this to the edge. So fetch is native on the edge as well. So you're kind of better off using fetch in general because you get the benefits that Dan said, but also it'll work cross-platform. You can install like Axios on the edge, but like I'd kind of discourage it. Go with like what's in the platform. So
yeah, totally. No, thanks, Nick. That's like a really good call. And you also, I'm pretty sure, can make Axios use fetch. I don't remember if that's like I think that's true. I might be wrong, but anyway, fetch is like really the basic standard for doing this stuff now. And like Nick was saying, there's so many things that just use it and have it natively. Node, excuse me, I'm starting to lose my voice already. That's great. Node didn't used to have fetch, natively. So if you wanted stuff, you had to basically have import a package that made fetch available. Now it is in, I don't know when that was, but it was a while ago that became true, that it was native. But and you can use it on the browser and everything, everywhere, pretty much everywhere you can use JavaScript. So it's a good place to start. So let's see, what else do we want to talk about with regards to this section? Was fetching, loading data. Yeah. And so I don't know if I put this in the notes, but I don't know if I actually have I don't think I'm making a request in a layout, which I should have added, but you can make API requests in layouts as well, right? And they benefit from the same deduplication stuff that pages do. And like we were talking about last time, if you load something in here that does an async, that does a fetch call or whatever, and you're switching around routes inside here, right? So our this is basically our layout here, right? Is this Star Wars thing in this border, and this does never re-renders when you're moving around inside the layout. And so we could make a request and the layout, basically, if we wanted to, that loads the Star Wars people and just says Star Wars and people or something like that. There's lots of reasons to do fetch requests and layouts or other data fetching methods, and they work just the same, exactly the same as in routes. So yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. Does anybody have any more questions about data fetching or any of this stuff while before I move on to the next section. I'm about to, the next section will be about like loading stuff via suspense. And it's pretty cool, but this is a good spot to pause for a moment if anybody has questions.
Yeah, there's no questions at the moment, but yeah, we can wait a sec there. Caleb just joined us too, so hey Caleb.
Hey. Okay, cool. Well, I'm gonna move on, but if you think of a question, feel free to you know, drop a line or raise your hand, and we will try to answer it. We'll see. Okay, so the next section is suspense, right? And so suspense is a component that is should have loaded up a doc for this, but suspense is a component that React makes. So it's part of React, right? It's not a special Next.js thing or a separate package. But suspense is basically how you do async stuff in React without doing you know, state switching, things like that. So basically what you do in suspense is you return a component that, like, you wrap it a component that is an async component, right? And while the async component is working, before it resolves, it loads the fallback UI, and then once it resolves, it shows the component. So you know, you can read more about suspense. I'm sure Nick can find this link and drop it. I just Googled React suspense. But suspense is a way. So one thing you might not want to do is if you are loading, and I'm going to show you how all this works. And I'm on my local dev, so just give it a sec. But so you can kind of see this, right? So if you are loading a lot of data on a page, right, or a bunch of different sections, but you don't want them all to be different routes, right? Sometimes you want your page to return faster, you know, with the important stuff, and then load the other stuff separate, right? And so in our example here, originally we had, you know, we were loading the person information. So in this case, it's like Luke Skywalker and some of his little details. But Luke Skywalker also has, you know, in the Star Wars API, some ships associated to him, right? And so I decided, okay, I don't want to make people wait for Luke Skywalker and all of his ships to load before I display this page. And so we'll see if refreshing works, because it might be cached. But yeah, all right. So you can see this. So the page loads quickly, and then the starships part loads a little bit slowly, and that I can handle again without having to install React Query or whatever and do client-side stuff. This is all still happening on the server side, which is really, really, really great. And the way you do that is with the suspense function. And so let me just clear this stuff out. And so our function, so this is our, well, let me show you where it gets injected, right? All right, so here's our page. And the thing that I added in this section was the starships thing and then suspense, right? And so this is basically a way to do the same thing that we were showing with the loading file, except without using Next.js, because it's not different routes, right? This is all in one route. And you can see here, Kirk, you can see the implementation. This is pretty much exactly what Next.js is doing behind the scenes with different routes and layouts that have the loading file is they wrap it in suspense, and then the loading file is the fallback, right? In our situation, fallback, I just did a little like loader that I grabbed from somewhere, and then in here is the starships component, and I'm passing it as a prop, like the starships list from the Star Wars API. And then here's our function. So this is a async component, which is kind of a thing that you don't see very often. But it's a React component. It's a React like server component that does the same thing, right? It pulls in starships, it makes a fetch call, and then it's returning a list of those things. And so this is making multiple fetch calls, right? So there's probably, I'm sure there's like, if you're looking at the Star Wars API, I'm sure there's easier ways to do this, right? But this is sort of simulating a situation where, okay, I have to load a bunch of different stuff and I have to make a bunch of different calls, and I don't want to have the user have to wait for all of that to happen before we see the page. And so this is, again, a server component, React server component, and you can see it's async. And so that's what tells the suspense React suspense to wait. And so suspense waits until this async function resolves. And so, yeah, so we're loading however many ships get, returned. There's no, in a production thing, you probably do some paging or something like that, but this is just going to load them all. And then when we're all done, it's going to return them in a list. And so in this situation, you do have to put in some sort of loading component, and then, but anywhere you use this, it will load separately. And the way that Next.js works with suspense as well is it chunks up, so it's smart about all this stuff. And I'm not a super expert on Webpack and streaming and things like that, but what Next.js is doing in this situation is basically packaging up all of this stuff, but then streaming the rest of it from the server. And so you're still, don't worry about that error. It's just in the dev, sometimes when you refresh, when it's in the middle, it shows an error. But when you load this page, there's no, you can see, so this is the network tab, right? And this is Ajax, XHR, whatever. This is fetch request. And in a typical React app, I suppose, you would see that action happening here, right? You would see it loading and the client would be able to see it. And there's none of that. So some of this stuff is streaming stuff, but it just it works. And this is the dev environment. And so you're going to see a lot of extra junk in here probably, but I probably can let's see what am I doing here? Oh yeah, and then so if we go to running app on Vercel dispense example, okay. So again, you can see all these examples, like production builds running on Vercel. But if you go to Luke Skywalker and you get our loading state, and then so this is the first time this page has been loaded, the first time probably this app has been loaded, and you can kind of see that it loaded all at once. But if you because that was the first time we ever loaded it, but if you refresh it, it does this. And so I wish there was links to other people from this situation, but I ran out of time when I was doing this last time. So always ways to make things better. But let me see how this works. Oh, C3PO probably doesn't have any starships. That's probably fine. Does it Darth Vader have starships? And helps it. Yeah. And so here's our and so this is all this is client-side routing. These were not full page refreshes. And it's loading data in a lot of different ways in ways that make things nice and fast and easy for the users. And also there's no data loading JavaScript that is run down to the client at all. It's very cool. It's really good stuff. So that's just I need to save that file. That's my little bit on suspense. You can use suspense and any server component. And again, if you need to do client-side stuff, you can. There's nothing stopping you from, loading React query and, making it run, making it do client-side requests. You totally can. But there's you'll find, I think, that there's a lot less reason to do that using Next.js. We're right now in the middle of rewriting an app that was just a bunch of PHP pages and create next app stuff inserted, and tons of API requests and tons of stuff like that. And I've yet to make any API requests on the client side, and hope not to ever. It's really cool. It's really good stuff. Okay, any questions on suspense or anything else I've covered so far? Yeah,
The only
said give C3PO the starship.
I was gonna say
I don't know if I would trust the C3PO with the starship, honestly.
maybe R2.
Yeah, I gotta think R2, he might not be on the first page. So this had if I had remembered or had more time, you might think about paging, right? So let's see if R2D2 has it. No, see, he should have an X1 because he basically pots that thing himself. Anyway, so this is only the first page of these results, right? And so you think, okay, well, what if I want paging, and I want paging that is nice, right? And not like a full page refresh or anything like that. You can do that. Next.js can do that pretty easily by, the server components can read these search params. So if we had like page equals 2 in the browser, you can have your app read that and then use that in the fetch requests. And that stuff will all happen on the client side as long as nothing breaks. And if it does break, then it'll do a full page refresh and hopefully work that time, which is also really, really nice. So you get all of this client-side routing, all these loading states and everything else. And I can, let's do this. Oh, that's the wrong one. So you can notice it's a little slow sometimes. I'm running the dev server, locally, and so it doesn't pre-build everything. And so when it's the first time it's hit a thing, it needs to like sit there and build for a second and then run. So, but let's see if I can. I don't remember how to turn off JavaScript in Firefox, but I'm sure there's a way.
I don't know if it's like in Chrome, but if you press Command P to just get a omnibar like in the dev tools, I don't know. You might be able to. I don't know. Okay.
I know it's in the. I know it's in the. I know I've seen it. I just like hardly ever, do it.
Yeah. I think it's in the dev tool settings, the cog icon there, if you want to just check real quick. Under settings, I believe.
So
It's always hard to grok this, I find. I'm always disable JavaScript. There you go.
All right. So I'll see that it's not going to work because it's the dev server. So shoot. All right. Well, let me pull up the.
You could run the start though, couldn't you? Like npm run start.
Yeah, I totally could. I don't want to make people wait for that, but I can run the
Okay.
one.
Oh yeah, true.
The Vercel one that we were looking at. Let me make sure that was turned off. Turn that back on. Oh, refresh. So it was loading some stuff when I turned off JavaScript. So that's why you saw that. But JavaScript is turned off and you still saw that loading state, and you still get to click around. See, this feels like JavaScript is running, doesn't it? I didn't expect to see some of this stuff. So maybe I don't know. I didn't test this out at the time. So, see, look at it. You got like.
I mean, yeah, it's per window. That's why. Yeah.
I think it's because I closed developer tools. I think that's what happened.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah,
so when I closed them, it turned that off. So okay, cool. So I'd be curious to see if this works. Actually, I've never tested this out with Suspense. So this might be a client-side thing that you need to handle. And that's another reason why you don't put important things in here, right? So that's good to know. But the paging stuff that I was talking about, right? So the way that I would do paging in this situation, and you can see the app is it's working fine. Got a broken link there, so I have to fix that somewhere. It's all right. Star Wars People 9. I bet this will just never resolve. And so
that's Biggs Darklighter. I've never heard of that character.
Biggs is he was Luke Skywalker's friend. He said hi to him when they were about to go to battle and stuff. He also grew up on Tatooine with Luke.
Okay.
There is a deleted scene where they hang out and whine about things together. Okay. Which is good that it got cut out. But anyway, he's a friend, a friend of Luke's, okay. And he is in the theatrical version, but it's just a short scene. Right, they're all excited right about when they're jumping in their X-wings.
Sorry for people watching the recording. I'm asking the hard questions here.
I'm glad somebody is. I'm glad I could show off a little bit of Star Wars knowledge. So anyway, but this kind of illustrates how you can set this stuff up, right? Oh yeah, so the paging, right? And so what I would do with paging in this situation is create links that are just Next.js links with the paging, parameters in the link, right? And so if JavaScript is turned on, you're going to get your client-side routing, and it'll go to the next page. You'll get your loading state again. It'll load, it'll show, and then it'll display the list. And if JavaScript is turned off, that will still work, which is the cooler thing about that. So let's make sure we turn JavaScript back on. Very cool. And what is happening? What's wrong? Did I turn off my? what in the world? Let's just kill what's ever happening here. I wonder if I hit like some sort of Star Wars API limit or something.
There's
Okay.
a disturbance in the force.
Right.
Sorry.
Actually, all right, cool. So any other suspense questions, Star Wars questions, data fetching questions? I'm going to pop into the caching and stuff like that, which we talked about. So there's the deduplication stuff that Next.js does, which lets you like be kind of free with your fetch calls. So you can make a bunch of the same fetch call, and it's only going to do it once, which is just a really great optimization to begin with. In this situation, I am going to actually do what Next.js did and run build. So I'm going to talk about some different ways that Next.js does caching and rendering, and or well, not rendering, but building. But a lot of it is hard. It doesn't work in, not that it doesn't work, but it doesn't like actually cache things when you're running the dev mode. So it's hard to illustrate it, and sometimes hard to, you need to like do a build to confirm that it's actually working, or look at it on a production site. And so in Next.js, you just kind of run build, and we can, I'm gonna switch over here while we let that do its thing. And so there are, and so you can like in the docs, right? They have a whole section on optimizing, right? Nope, not optimizing. Where was that section? I guess it's under data fetching, right? So caching and revalidation, and then in rendering too, right? So there's, okay, so let's talk about rendering first. So there's two basic ways for your Next.js page to be rendered, and this happens at the build stage, is static and dynamic. And what static means is it gets built at build time. So whether that's running on your local machine or running on, you know, a GitHub action, or right on the like for cell server and Apple for server, the page is built and all of the content is there. And so that if you have a fetch call in a static route, that fetch call happens at build time. So you get live data there, but then the live data is not, like by default, is not, is baked in, right? And so without any, you know, by default, if you wanted that data to get refreshed, you'd have to do a rebuild. And so it's really handy for a lot of things. It's very, very good for blog posts, for example, and, you know, things like that, things that are not going to change very often. And then the other sort of default way is dynamic. And so your routes will get put into dynamic. And so it's like static is the default setting. And so when you do a build locally, you get this nice output. And so it's going to show you whether it thinks a page is static or dynamic, right? And so the circle means static, and then the lambda, is that what that is means dynamic. And so by default, any dynamic route is going to be rendered dynamically, because the static builder doesn't know anything about these, and so it can't even handle that. There is a way to, and maybe if we have bonus time, we can look at it, but there is a way to do a build time and build a bunch of these pages out, you know, ahead of time, which is really cool. But by default, that's what you do. And then there are other ways to basically force a page to be dynamic. And so you can say, so let's get some of these in. So where are we? Time, yeah. So dynamic, right? So here you can, in a page route, you can just export this constant called dynamic, and you can say force dynamic. And so the other values are something like default or auto or something like that, and then static, I think. And you can find docs for that on the site as well. It's probably easiest to, oh, I put a link in. So static route, dynamic route. Dynamic functions. Sorry, I don't remember where the reference is, but it's here somewhere. We'll find it later. But anyway, you can force a page to be dynamic even if Next.js wants it to be static. And so like things that you would do that on. I don't know. This example shows what time it is, right? In whatever time zone. And so you wouldn't want this to be static if you wanted the time to be, up to date, because it would be the time of the build time if you didn't say, hey, do this statically. npm start. And so now we are looking at our app basically in production mode. And here's our time diagram. And so this dynamic page, all right, so I think I have a loader in here. Yeah, loading state. So it's, I think get time, this get time function is something I wrote, but it's like doing that sleep thing again, just to display the loading state. But this one, every time you come back to it, well, maybe not when you load it, but if you refresh, it's going to get a new time for us, right? Layouts have the same situation, right? But again, you can make calls inside layouts, right? And so this layout is getting the time as well, which is somewhere around here. Yeah, time. And that's displaying here. And you can see there it was built and the time is locked into the, did that change? About to say something wrong, wasn't I? It is changing. Okay, so this is actually, all right, so this is like forcing this into dynamic land. Is that right? Time dynamic. Yeah, I don't know. Actually, I expected that to stay. So I'll have to look into that. But this is the static page, right? So this is like default export. And you can see here, this time is never, I'm hitting refresh and this time is never changing. So like we generated this static is the index page here. But we have an async function. We did this get time or whatever, but this happens without me doing anything special. It's going to assume that I only want to make this API request when I build it, and then it's going to lock that in forever, right? By default, which is, I think, good. I think it's a good default, but it's something to be like very aware of, right? And so for Star Wars stuff, that's probably fine, right? Because like Star Wars stuff, until maybe they make another movie, it's not going to change for a while, right? And in lots of situations, that's fine. In some situations, you need to be, much more aware of it, obviously. And so there's other, so like, okay, so how can we get away from that? The dynamic route is one way, right? So it's just say force dynamic, this thing's going to reload every time. There's other ways to get around that too. All right, and so let me see, this is another export that you can do, and this is revalidate, right? And so what this will do is this will do a build at, it'll do the call and like lock it in just like the other one did. But then you can set a revalidate time that says every X seconds, so this is in seconds, every whatever seconds, if somebody has hit this page and it's been over this time, rebuild it in the background. And so so this is a static route, and this was the first time we hit it, and so it's doing its pause. And so theoretically, yeah, so it is refreshing, right? If you put this at, so this is 0, so it's going to do it every time. If you put this at like a minute or something like that, that means if 1,000 people hit it within a minute, they're all going to see the same thing, and it's not going to make that fetch call again. But after the minute's gone, the next person will see the new time for the next minute. And then there's other things that you can do inside of your fetch calls to take care of the situation. And so you can say in your, so this get time is sending, I probably should have just left the fetch call in here, but this get time is sending some options to our fetch. And one of those options is cache no store. And so we're saying, hey, Next.js, I know that you like to cache things all the time in your fetch calls, and that's really great. But in this situation, don't do that, right? So don't ever cache the Asia Bangkok time. Always load it up fresh for us. So this is the no store route. And when we hit this, it is, I don't know if it doesn't do that the first time. Yeah, oh no, you can see the seconds changes, right? And so it's updating that time every time we hit this route. Another one is, so that revalidate thing on the route level works really cool. You can also set revalidate on your fetch calls. And so revalidate 0. So this is the same thing. So this is pretty similar to just like not to saying no cache. And then revalidate 5. So let's see revalidate 0. So that's 57:35. This is me, like, I was trying to see if this works and kept forgetting what time it was before I hit refresh, but you can see the time changing. If we go revalidate 5, this is, so if I change it, all right, so that first one was, okay, it had the time that it was loaded at build, but when I hit this route, it was like, oh, it's way more than 5 seconds. And so it rebuilt it in the background. And when I refreshed it, we saw the new one right away. But you can see I just hit refresh and it didn't change at all. I think it's been 5 seconds. Yeah, so after it's more than 5 seconds, it's going to rebuild the thing for us. So I can keep hitting refresh and it's going to stay the same. And then there you go. It was 5 seconds later and it got the new version.
There's just a quick question.
Yeah.
I might have missed this because I had to mute myself for a second to take a call, but Kirk's wondering, is revalidate a special next word? I don't know if you answered that while I was
The revalidate is, yes. And so these options that are in this get time are just getting passed straight to fetch. So this is, you can see it's in this next option. So it's like, that's their extension of fetch. The no store, the cache value is part of fetch. So this is part of fetch, straight like the spec, right? And you know, they do a good job of explaining a lot of this stuff in their caching and revalidating docs. And so if you're interested in this more, they're going to get a lot deeper into all this stuff. But you can, there's also React Cache, which I'm not going to get into this on this side, but you can do some kind of cool stuff with that as well. And that's something that's built into React that you can use in your React server components. And then revalidate data, there's the same thing too, right? So this background revalidation is what we're looking at in the fetch call, right? Revalidate 60. And so that's saying every 60 seconds in the background, if it's been more than 60 seconds, what revalidate does is shows the old version for that next request. And then the request after that, you'll get the new content. And then on-demand revalidation is, so this is actually kind of, I don't know if we want to really get into this, but there's more like, there's deeper level caching things that you can do you can just not set the revalidate stuff, so that's always locked in, but then you can like imperatively reset invalidate the cache for a certain request or a certain group of requests, which is really neat. So yeah, so there's a lot of cool things in there. Do we have any other caching, revalidation, static, dynamic questions? I don't feel like I really did a good job. We talked about static and dynamic a little bit in the first part too, so I kind of sped over it. But if there's any more questions about any of this, I think I've pretty much hit the end of all of the things that we were doing. So
yeah, we're at the hour, but there is a question from Piotrek. I hope I pronounced that correctly. If you will need to modify data that was downloaded the first time when rendering a page, you need to save it yourself, or do you take it out from the cache somehow? I'm not sure what you mean exactly, Piotrek, or do you understand that?
Well, so I mean, like, this is kind of the different approaches to that problem, right? And so if you don't do anything, like if you just do this default stuff, like the way that I have the Star Wars example set up, right? All of this stuff is like, okay, so the ID is dynamic, right? But the people one is static, right? So you can see here, I did build time. And so Next.js, when I did the build, made that API request to the Star Wars API for the list of people. And that will never, ever change. Like, there's nothing I can do about that anymore, right? Because I didn't do anything about it. Because that's the default behavior of fetch requests in Next.js. And so there's, as far as like getting an updated version of something, there's all those different approaches that I covered. And so one way is to just like either in a dynamic route, like this is going to load every time, even on production. And I think like I was saying, you can, what is it called? There's a static, sorry, I'm just trying to like remember what it is, but there's a way to there's a way to like prefetch those dynamic routes and like load the content up for the ones that exist, and then still leave other ones dynamic. And other than that, after that, like you want to basically just think about your routes per experience, like per situation, and say, okay, what makes the most sense? Like, does this need to always be the newest thing every single time? And can our database handle that, et cetera? Or is it like acceptable if people see old content for X amount of seconds, that sort of thing. I saw something pop up, but I'm not sure. Maybe it's just a problem with low knowledge architecture application, but yeah, it's a relevant question. It's just that there's no, like, the answer is it depends. you know what I mean? It's just like that's the problem. Is the problem with the question, I suppose, is like there's a lot of different answers. Like there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. Yeah, and also you mentioned taking out from the cache somehow. You can do that as well. You can on-demand revalidation is how they handle it. So you can say in one of your functions, like, okay, so here's this example, right? So this thing gets cached by default, but you can, in your fetch in the next object, you can say, okay, this belongs to the collection group, right? So you can tag fetch requests, and then later you can say, okay, revalidate tag, and you can say collection, and everything that was on in that tag gets revalidated. And so you're like, okay, I got this new request. That means I know that a bunch of other things need to be refreshed. You can just say, hey, Next.js, everything else in this group is done. I mean, like is like needs to be updated. You know what I mean? So there's like a lot of different approaches, and which approach you take, I think, depends on the specific situation. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's great, Dan. And that brings us to about an hour here. So I think unless there's any other questions, we'll probably wrap it up here. I'll just wait a sec to see if any other things are coming in. Okay. Doesn't appear to be, but who knows? Maybe you'll be doing a part 3 then, Dan, if more questions.
Yeah, I'd be happy. And I just dropped to the example repo for people who came in late as well. So all of this stuff is up on the Next.js on GitHub, so you can see it in action and pull it down, play with it yourself. So
cool. Well, I just want to give a special thank you to our speaker, Dan, for being here, and for all of you here. We look forward to keeping the discussion going in Slack or in the repository that Dan shared, or in Virtual Coffee chat. We'll be posting the video at some point. The AV team, that usually goes out pretty quickly, but I'd say expect in the next week or two. And if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to the community maintainers. We're always here to support you and to answer any question. And we're looking forward to future lunch and learns. And thanks every day. Not every day. Thanks everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Nick.